the story begins not with a scream, but with the heavy, grinding sound of stone against stone. Long before the sky turned into a bruised purple and the earth was choked by the machines of hell, there was a kingdom called Argent de Nur. It was a place of high white towers, deep green valleys, and a people who believed that their strength was eternal. This part of the history is a story of the quiet before the storm, a realization that even the greatest light casts a shadow that eventually grows long enough to swallow the world. The atmosphere here is cold, ancient, and still, and the ground beneath the boots of the night sentinels is a floor of polished granite that has stood for 1,000 years. The air tastes of mountain snow, iron, and the faint, sweet scent of the blue energy that powers the city. The sound of the world is a low and constant hum, the vibration of the great wraiths sleeping deep beneath the earth, making the entire kingdom feel like a colossal, sleeping giant. You see the young warriors standing on the battlements, their silver armor catching the first light of a sun that hasn't yet seen the fire, realizing that in the age of the Dark Ages, the danger is the peace that makes you forget how to bleed. Deep within the training grounds of the Sentinel Prime, the atmosphere becomes heavy and rhythmic. This is the era of the first training, where the atmosphere is one of hard discipline and narrow focus. You hear the sound of wooden practice swords clattering against shields, a noise that is constant and dry, like the sound of rain on a tin roof. This part of the history is a story of the unbroken line, a realization that a warrior is not made of steel, but of the habits they build in the dark. The instructors move with a sturdy and measured might, their voices low and calm, as they teach the young men how to breathe through the pain. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and oiled leather, and the pale glow of the blue torches flickers against the stone walls, casting long shadows that look like the legends of the past. He feels the steady ache in the shoulders and the solid weight of the shield, a feeling of total and grounded preparation. Deep within the vault of the sleeping wraiths, the atmosphere becomes sacred and humid. The group of initiates is led down into the dark, where the walls are damp with the moisture of the deep earth. This is the trial of the silent connection, where the atmosphere becomes one of vast echoes and spiritual weight. They see the massive, glowing forms of the wraiths, the ancient beings that provide the energy for the entire civilization. The sound of the wraiths breathing is a deep and vibrating thrum, making the vault feel like the inside of a massive heart. This part of the history is a realization that their power is a gift from something much older and much stranger than themselves. He feels the static electricity on the skin and the slow pulse of the ground beneath his feet, a feeling of total and grounded reverence. At the edge of the kingdom, where the white stone meets the wild forests, the group encounters a stray beast from the outer wastes, a creature of bone and gray fur that has been driven mad by the first whispers of the dark. The fight is a story of the steel against the wild. The atmosphere is violent, cold, and fast, as the beast leaps from the shadows, its claws scraping against the silver breastplates of the sentinels. This is the trial of the first blood, where the atmosphere becomes one of sharp focus and sudden impact. The young Doomslayer, not yet a god, but already a man of unusual silence, moves with a sturdy and brutal efficiency, his hands finding the throat of the beast with a strength that surprises even his teachers. The sound of the struggle is a harsh and grating scuffle, making the air feel like it is filled with the dust of the forest. When the beast finally lies still, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and muffled quiet, a realization that the walls of the city are the only thing keeping the world from falling apart. Leaving the forest, the journey leads to the Great Bridge of Argent, a structure of white marble that spans a canyon so deep the bottom is lost in a purple mist. The atmosphere is vast, windy, and open, a realization that the kingdom is a beautiful island in a sea of unknown threats. This part of the history is a story of the High Watch, where the atmosphere is one of loneliness and constant vigilance. You see the way the wind whips the red banners of the sentinels, the fabric snapping with a sound like breaking wood. The air is thin and carries the taste of salt and cold stone. The sound of the water rushing miles below is a deep and constant roar, signaling that the pulse of the earth is a powerful and indifferent force. The walk through the Hall of the Fallen Kings is a story of the long memory. You encounter statues of the rulers who came before, their eyes made of blue gems that seem to follow you as you pass. This is a moment of raw and historical weight. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the kingdom is built on the bones of those who believed they would never fall. This part of the history is a story of the silver record, where the initiates must learn the names of every battle fought since the beginning of time. The sound of their boots on the granite floor is a sharp and respectful click, making the young warrior feel small and solid in a world that counts every sacrifice. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching the cold stone of a tomb to remind himself that glory is just another word for a very long sleep. Deep in the heart of the barracks, the final trial of the first part takes place as the warriors sit around a low and smoldering fire. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and heavy, a realization that the bonds they form now are the only things that will hold when the sky turns black. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared meal, where they eat simple bread and dried meat, talking about their homes in the valleys and the mothers they left behind. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the armor they wear is a cage as much as it is a protection. The sound of a distant horn blowing on the walls is a lonely and deep note, signaling that the true enemy is the time that passes while they wait for a war that hasn't started yet. The experience in the early days of Argent Dinur ends with the warrior standing on the highest tower, looking out over the horizon, where a single pinprick of red light has appeared in the distance. The white of the towers has led to a sovereignty of the approaching storm. He carries the weight of the first beast's blood and the silence of the wraiths. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the age of peace is a path of fading light. The focus would now shift to the first breach, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the fire into a world of screaming metal, opened gates, and the first taste of the hell that was waiting for them. The final legacy of the first part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the still moment. You have seen the warriors walk through the stone and the light to find the anchor within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the tradition. As the blue glow of the city fades into the evening shadows and the first red star of the abyss appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doom Slayer finds its first and grounded resolution in the waiting for the war, leaving behind the quiet world for a world of fire, blood, and a journey that is about to begin. The silence of the high towers is shattered not by a horn, but by the sound of the sky itself tearing open like old parchment. This part of the history is a story of the first rupture, a realization that the red star on the horizon was not a light, but an eye. The atmosphere here is violent, hot, and erratic, as the once blue sky of Argent Deneur is choked by a sudden, thick haze of orange smoke and the smell of burning sulfur. The ground beneath the feet of the night sentinels no longer feels like solid granite. It vibrates with a deep and angry tremor, as if the earth is trying to scream. You see the massive gates of the outer city buckle and warp, the iron melting into glowing slag before the first foot of a demon even touches the threshold. The air tastes of copper, ash, and the dry, bitter scent of ozone. The sound of the world is a chaos of metal and bone, as the peace of 1,000 years is burned away in a single breath. The Doom Slayer, still a man in silver plate, stands at the edge of the battlements, his hand gripping the hilt of a heavy broadsword, realizing that in the Dark Ages, the only thing more certain than death is the fire that brings it. As the first wave of the abyss pours through the breach, the atmosphere shifts to one of sudden brutality. They are not fighting men or beasts of the forest, but nightmares made of muscle and hate. This is the era of the Iron Wall, where the atmosphere is one of grinding resistance and desperate strength. You see the way the demons move jerky, fast, and mindless, their claws leaving deep, jagged marks in the white stone walls. This part of the history is a story of the shield's breaking point, a realization that the old ways of war are useless against a tide that does not feel fear. The sound of the sentinel shields locking together is a heavy and rhythmic clang, a noise that tries to drown out the wet, tearing sounds of the monsters. The instructors who once spoke of measured strikes now move with a raw and primal might, swinging their hammers into the chests of the invaders with a force that shatters the stone beneath them. He feels the searing heat of the nearby fire and the steady vibration of the screams in the air, a feeling of total and grounded survival. Deep within the narrow streets of the lower district, the atmosphere becomes cramped and smothering. The group of sentinels is forced into a series of tight alleys where the smoke is so thick they can barely see the person next to them. This is the trial of the blind blade, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled sounds and sudden shadows. They find that the demons are not just killing, they are changing the world around them, their touch turning the beautiful marble into a black, oily substance that pulses with a dark light. The sound of the demons breathing in the fog is a harsh and rasping growl, making the alleys feel like the inside of a throat. This part of the history is a realization that the enemy is not just an army, but a sickness that wants to eat the land itself. He feels the sticky heat of the blood on his gauntlets and the constant pressure of the fog against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the center of the great plaza, beneath the statue of the first king, the group encounters an implored, a creature of scorched leather and glowing cracks that hurls balls of liquid fire with a wicked and whistling speed. The fight is a story of the steel against the flame. The atmosphere is blinding, loud, and dangerous as the plaza is illuminated by the orange bursts of the demon's magic. This is the trial of the unmoving stance, where the atmosphere becomes one of extreme heat and precise violence. The young Doomslayer moves with a brutal and direct power, ignoring the singe on his cloak to close the distance, his blade cutting through the demon's neck with a sound like stone hitting meat. The sound of the fire hitting the marble is a sharp and hissing pop, making the air feel like it is filled with the heat of a dying star. When the implored finally falls, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and smoky stillness, a realization that the plaza is now a graveyard. Leaving the plaza, the journey leads to the inner wall, where the sentinels make their final stand for the day. The atmosphere is vast, terrifying, and red as they look out from the heights and see a dozen more tears in the sky, each one spilling more darkness into the valleys below. This part of the history is a story of the high sacrifice, where the atmosphere is one of grim determination and loss of hope. You see the way the blue energy of the city begins to flicker and fade, the light of the wraiths being choked out by the red smoke of hell. The air is thick and carries the taste of burnt wood and raw iron. The sound of the demon horns blowing in the distance is a low and gut-wrenching note, signaling that the tide of the abyss is only just beginning to rise. The walk through the barracks of the dead is a story of the broken line. You encounter the bodies of the young initiates who were training only hours ago, their silver armor now tarnished and cracked. This is a moment of raw and heavy grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the future of the kingdom has been cut short in its sleep. This part of the history is a story of the tarnished silver, where the survivors must step over the broken shields of their brothers to reach the armory. The sound of their boots on the blood-slicked stone is a dull and squishing thud, making the Doomslayer feel solid and heavy in a world that is falling apart. He moves with a sturdy and balanced resolve, his hand reaching down to pick up a discarded chain mace, realizing that the sword is no longer enough for the work that needs to be done. Deep in the heart of the inner sanctum, the final trial of the second part takes place as the warriors huddle together in a cold and dark corner of the temple. The atmosphere is intimate, tense, and gritty, a realization that the walls that once felt eternal are now just thin shells of stone. This is a story of the sovereignty of the last breath, where they share their remaining water and sharpen their blades by the light of a single flickering torch. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that they are no longer fighting for a king or a kingdom, but for the right to see the next hour. The sound of the demons scratching at the stone doors outside is a high and grating scrape, signaling that the true enemy is the hunger that never stops knocking. The experience of the first breach ends with the warrior standing in front of the massive bronze doors of the Wraith Tower, the last line of defense for the source of their power. The white of the city has led to a sovereignty of the ash and cinder. He carries the weight of the fallen brother's shield and the silence of the doomed. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened defiance, a realization that the path of the sentinel is now a path of the dying fire. The focus would now shift to the deep dark, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the shadow into the tunnels beneath the city, where the first ancient machines of war were hidden away. The final legacy of the second part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the heavy blow. You have seen the warriors walk through the fire and the smoke to find the spark within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the loss. As the orange glow of the burning city fades into the black of the tunnels, and the first sounds of the deep machines begin to rumble in the distance, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doom Slayer finds its second and grounded resolution in the refusal to fall, leaving behind the surface world for a world of metal, darkness, and a journey that is descending into the heart of the earth. The journey leaves the burning streets of the surface behind and descends into the deep vaults, a place where the history of the kingdom is written in cold iron and sleeping grease. This is the subterranean heart of Argent Dinur, a region of colossal shadows and rusted secrets, where the air is so heavy with the scent of old oil and cold metal that it feels thick in the throat. This part of the history is a story of the mechanical ancestry, a realization that before the kingdom was a place of light and blue energy. It was a forge built on the back of massive, forgotten machines. The atmosphere here is drained, hollow, and echoing, and the ground beneath the boots of the expedition is a floor of textured steel plates that ring with a deep and distant clang with every step. The air tastes of iron shavings, coal dust, and the sharp, chemical bite of ancient preservatives. The sound of the world is a low and hollow groan, as the weight of the mountain presses down on the vaulted ceilings, making the entire underworld feel like a stone giant that hasn't taken a breath in 1,000 years. The Doom Slayer leads the way into the dark, his hand feeling the cold vibration of the walls, realizing that in the deep vaults, the danger is the silence that wants to keep the machines asleep. As the team pushes through the grand silos, the atmosphere shifts to one of industrial awe. They find the Atlan war machines, monstrous suits of armor the size of towers, hanging from massive chains like the skeletons of gods. You see the way the dim blue light of their dying power cores reflects off the dusty metal, turning the shadows into a deep, ghostly indigo that makes the machines feel like they are watching the intruders. This is the era of the Iron Titan, where the atmosphere is one of heavy dormancy and latent power. This part of the history is a story of the metal grave, a realization that the sentinels have traded their natural strength for the cold reliability of the machine. The sound of their own footsteps is amplified into a thunderous and rhythmic beat, making the silos feel like the inside of a massive bell. Gustav, the leader of this detachment, moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes fixed on the control levers of the first Atlan, realizing that to wake the machine is to invite the war into the very bones of the earth. He feels the raw cold of the steel and the steady vibration of the deep earth in his legs, a feeling of total and grounded preparation. Deep within the engine core of the first Atlan, the atmosphere becomes hot and suffocating. The group must climb through the internal gears and pistons of the machine to reach the pilot's seat, where the air is filled with the smell of scorched copper and ancient steam. This is the trial of the internal heat, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical struggle and muffled sound. The warriors find that the grease on the pipes is as slick as ice, making the climb a dangerous dance between the grinding teeth of the machine. The sound of the steam escaping from a cracked valve is a high and piercing hiss, making the core feel like the inside of a living throat. This part of the history is a realization that to control the Atlan, they must become part of the mechanism itself. He feels the searing heat on the palms and the steady hammering of the air against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded persistence. At the center of a wide, circular platform where the gears meet the stone, the group encounters a void crawler, a creature made of many jointed limbs and glowing red eyes that has been nesting in the dark for centuries. The fight is a story of the steel against the chitin. The atmosphere is violent, dark, and grating as the creature skitters across the metal walls, its claws leaving sparks in the dark. This is the trial of the fast reflex, where the atmosphere becomes one of sharp clatters and sudden impacts. The Doom Slayer moves with a brutal and direct efficiency, his heavy sword catching the creature mid-leap and pinning it to the rusted floor. The sound of the struggle is a harsh and grinding scuff, making the air feel like it is filled with the dust of the machine. When the crawler finally lies still, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and oily stillness, a realization that the vaults are no longer empty. Leaving the platform, the journey leads to the edge of the fuel reservoir, a vast lake of blue liquid energy that glows with a light so bright it hurts the eyes. The atmosphere is vast, vibrant, and humming, a realization that the power of the wraiths is being stored here in its most raw and dangerous form. This part of the history is a story of the liquid spark, where the atmosphere is one of electrical tension and high pressure. You see the way the blue light ripples on the metal walls, looking like the surface of a digital sea. The air is warm and carries the taste of ozone and sweet chemicals. The sound of the energy rushing through the pipes is a deep and constant thrum, signaling that the heart of the mountain is a place of absolute and terrifying power. The walk through the hall of the first pilots is a story of the metal memory. You encounter the empty suits of armor of the men who first mastered the Atlans, their visors looking toward the horizon they once protected. This is a moment of raw and industrial grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the machines outlive the men who bleed for them. This part of the history is a story of the rusted legacy, where the initiates must touch the cold steel of the armor to connect with the spirit of the forge. The sound of their boots on the metal floor is a sharp and respectful click, making the young warrior feel small and solid in a world made of giants. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand checking the integrity of the gears as he prepares to wake the sleeping metal. Deep in the heart of the command center, the final trial of the third part takes place as the warriors pull the great lever of the first ignition. The atmosphere is intimate, tense, and blinding, a realization that the silence of the vaults is about to end forever. This is a story of the sovereignty of the first spark, where the blue energy floods the machine, turning the cold iron into a living, breathing weapon. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they talk about the simple, wooden toys of their childhood, and how they never thought they would be climbing inside a god to save a city. The sound of the Atlan's engine roaring to life is a deep and final note, signaling that the true enemy is the fear of the power they have just unleashed. The experience in the deep vaults ends with the warrior standing in the cockpit of the Atlan, looking out through the reinforced glass at the dark tunnels ahead. The rust of the silos has led to a sovereignty of the blue fire. He carries the weight of the first pilot's honor and the silence of the underworld. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path of the sentinel is now a path of the iron giant. The focus would now shift to the surface ascent, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the metal back into the light of the burning world. The final legacy of the third part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the heavy heart. You have seen the warriors walk through the oil and the gears to find the spark within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the machine. As the blue glow of the core fills the dark and the first footsteps of the Atlan shake the mountain to its roots, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doom Slayer finds its third and grounded resolution in the awakening of the steel, leaving behind the quiet dark for a world of metal, thunder, and a journey that is rising back to the surface. The journey rises from the cold, dark silence of the underworld and bursts back onto the surface. But the world they left behind is no longer recognizable. This part of the history is a story of the clash of giants, a realization that the war has grown beyond the reach of swords and shields. The atmosphere here is roaring, smoky, and massive. As the ground of Argent Dinur trembles under the weight of creatures that dwarf the high towers of the city. These are the Titans, mountainous heaps of bone, muscle, and hellfire that move with a slow, world-shaking power. The air tastes of burning hair, hot iron, and the thick, suffocating dust of collapsed buildings. The sound of the world is a constant and bone-deep thunder, the sound of a god's hammer hitting the earth over and over again. The Doom Slayer sits in the pilot's throne of the Atlan, his hands gripping the control levers of the metal giant, realizing that in the age of the Titans, the danger is the scale of the destruction that leaves no room for the small or the weak. As the Atlan steps out of the mountain vault and onto the broken plains, the atmosphere shifts to one of mechanical might. You see the way the massive metal feet of the machine crush the scorched earth, leaving deep, iron-rimmed craters in the soil. This is the era of the Iron God, where the atmosphere is one of heavy impacts and industrial power. This part of the history is a story of the steel wall, a realization that the only thing that can stop a mountain of meat is a mountain of metal. The sound of the Atlan's hydraulic joints is a high and whistling hiss, a noise that cuts through the roar of the fire. The Doom Slayer moves the giant limbs with a sturdy and brutal precision, feeling the vibration of every step traveling up through the floor of the cockpit and into his very bones. He feels the steady hum of the power core and the constant sway of the horizon as he walks into the storm, a feeling of total and grounded dominance. Deep within the smoke of the outer gates, the atmosphere becomes confined and blinding. The Atlan must push through clouds of black soot so thick that the sensors of the machine begin to fail. This is the trial of the invisible giant, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled sounds and sudden shadows. Suddenly, the massive, glowing eyes of a Titan appear through the smoke, looking like two red suns burning in the dark. The sound of the Titan's roar is a deep and gut-wrenching vibration, making the cockpit glass rattle in its frame. This part of the history is a realization that the enemy is not just large, but ancient and filled with a hatred that is older than the stone of the mountain. He feels the searing heat on the glass and the steady pressure of the gaze from the monster, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the base of the Great Wall, the group of Atlans encounters a siege titan, a creature with arms like battering rams and a hide made of hardened obsidian. The fight is a story of the metal against the bone. The atmosphere is violent, loud, and earth-shaking as the Atlan swings its massive iron flail into the chest of the beast, sending shards of stone and black blood flying across the battlefield. This is the trial of the unyielding blow, where the atmosphere becomes one of forceful impacts and physical strain. The Doom Slayer pushes the machine to its limits, the gears grinding, and the blue energy of the wraiths sparking in the joints. The sound of the impact is a deep and final boom, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of a falling moon. When the Titan finally falls, hitting the ground with a force that creates a new canyon, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and dusty stillness, a realization that even a mountain can be broken. Leaving the fallen beast, the journey leads to the edge of the burning valley, a place where the retreating demons have set the forests on fire to hide their numbers. The atmosphere is vast, orange, and suffocating, a realization that the victory at the wall is only the beginning of a much longer march. This part of the history is a story of the Trail of Ash, where the atmosphere is one of exhaustion and environmental ruin. You see the way the light of the fires reflects off the polished silver of the Atlands, making the machines look like they are made of living flame. The air is hot and carries the taste of burnt pine and sulfur. The sound of the metal feet on the scorched wood is a sharp and grating snap, signaling that the path of the destroyer is a place where nothing is left standing. The walk through the ruins of the High Watch is a story of the Iron Grief. You encounter the broken remains of other Atlands that were caught in the initial surge, their pilots still trapped in the crushed cockpits. This is a moment of raw and metallic sadness. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that even the strongest machines are fragile when the world turns against them. This part of the history is a story of the dulling steel, where the survivors must walk past the wreckage of their own strength. The sound of the wind whistling through the empty metal hulls is a high and lonesome note, making the Doom Slayer feel solid and heavy in a world that is being torn apart. He moves with a sturdy and balanced resolve, his hand checking the energy levels of his core, knowing that the machine is the only thing keeping the dark at bay. Deep in the heart of the battlefield camp, the final trial of the fourth part takes place as the pilots climb out of their machines to rest for a short and brutal hour. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and gritty, a realization that the comfort of the machine is a temporary thing. This is a story of the sovereignty of the cold metal, where they sit on the feet of their Atlands, their bodies still vibrating from the motion of the war. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they talk about the quiet gardens of Argent Dinur and how the flowers used to smell before the ash. The sound of the distant titans roaring in the night is a low and constant threat, signaling that the true enemy is the scale of a war that never seems to sleep. The experience of the Titan battle ends with the warrior standing on the shoulder of his machine, looking toward the horizon where the main gates of hell have begun to stabilize. The white of the city has led to a sovereignty of the scorched plains. He carries the weight of the fallen pilot's name and the silence of the wreckage. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened defiance, a realization that the path of the Atlan is now a path of the final gate. The focus would now shift to the red wastes, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the invasion back to the source of the fire. The final legacy of the fourth part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the heavy step. You have seen the warriors walk through the smoke and the giants to find the anchor within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the metal. As the orange glow of the burning valley fades into the dark, and the first sights of the Hellgates appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doom Slayer finds its fourth and grounded resolution in the march to the gate, leaving behind the surface of the world for a world of red stone, screaming air, and a journey that is entering the heart of the abyss. The journey leaves the scorched remains of the physical world behind and steps through the shimmering, jagged tier of the first Hellgate. This is the crossing into the Blood Swamps, a region of the abyss where the air is a thick, humid fog of red mist, and the ground is a treacherous floor of sinking peat and ancient, rotted bone. This part of the history is a story of the flesh of the earth, a realization that in the realm of the demons, the land itself is alive and hungry. The atmosphere here is warm, wet, and suffocating, and the ground beneath the boots of the night sentinels is a soft, pulsing surface that feels like walking on the tongue of a giant. The air tastes of iron, stagnant water, and the cloying, sweet scent of decay. The sound of the world is a constant and low gurgle, as if the swamp is digesting the memories of everyone who has ever fallen here, making the entire region feel like a colossal, living wound. The Doom Slayer leads the team into the crimson fog, his boots sinking into the red mud with a deep and wet squish. Realizing that in the blood swamps, the danger is the world that wants to pull you under and keep you there. As the team pushes through the towering stalks of black fungus, the atmosphere shifts to one of submerged dread. They find pools of bubbling ichor that glow with a faint, sickly light, reflecting the distorted faces of the demons that watch from beneath the surface. This is the era of the Crimson Tide, where the atmosphere is one of heavy dampness and biological horror. This part of the history is a story of the sinking path, a realization that the sentinels are no longer walking on stone, but on the layers of those who came before. The sound of the bubbles popping in the swamp is a sharp and hissing snap, a noise that breaks the heavy silence like a warning. The Doom Slayer moves with a sturdy and careful might, his eyes tracking the ripples in the red water as the pulsing glow of the fungi tries to trick his vision into seeing movement where there is only shadow. He feels the heavy dampness of the cloak and the steady resistance of the mud against his legs, a feeling of total and grounded persistence. Deep within the heart of the rotting grove, the atmosphere becomes confined and brittle. The group must navigate through a forest of calcified ribs that stretch out of the swamp like the cage of a long-dead god. This is the trial of the narrow passage, where the atmosphere becomes one of fragile balance and muffled sound. The warriors find that the air is filled with a fine red dust that makes every breath a struggle, a realization that the swamp is trying to settle in their lungs. The sound of their armor scraping against the bone trees is a harsh and grating screech, making the grove feel like the inside of a dead body. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the swamp, they must move like the water through the wreckage. He feels the slippery grit on the gauntlets and the steady pressure of the fog against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the center of a wide, bubbling clearing where the trees are made of twisted muscle, the group encounters a mancubus larva, a bloated, heavy creature with skin like wet leather that spits globs of burning acid with a sickly and wet thud. The fight is a story of the steel against the sludge. The atmosphere is violent, hazy, and acidic, as the clearing is filled with the green smoke of the creature's breath, turning the red air into a blur of toxic light. This is the trial of the hardened shell, where the atmosphere becomes one of sudden impacts and chemical heat. The Doom Slayer moves with a brutal and direct power, his mace shattering the creature's armor with a sound like stone hitting wet clay. The sound of the acid hitting the sentinel shields is a high and sizzling pop, making the air feel like it is filled with the stench of burning meat. When the creature finally collapses into the mud, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and bubbling stillness, a realization that the swamp is always waiting to claim the loser. Leaving the grove, the journey leads to the edge of the vein bridge, a narrow path made of hardened arteries that cross a river of flowing lava. The atmosphere is vast, hot, and pulsing, a realization that the Hellgate has led them to the plumbing of the abyss. This part of the history is a story of the burning pulse, where the atmosphere is one of vertical risk and rhythmic heat. You see the way the bridge moves with the heartbeat of the land, swaying in the hot wind with a sound like rope stretching under weight. The air is thick and carries the taste of salt and burnt copper. The sound of the lava rushing below is a deep and constant roar, signaling that the blood of the abyss is a river of fire that never stops flowing. The walk through the path of the sunken shields is a story of the Fatting honor. You encounter the half-buried remains of the first expedition, their silver armor now stained red and pitted by the swamp's hunger. This is a moment of raw and heavy grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that even the strongest warriors can be swallowed by the mud of the dark. This part of the history is a story of the Red Shroud, where the survivors must reach into the mud to reclaim the name tags of their fallen brothers. The sound of their boots on the hollow bones is a sharp and ringing thud, making the Doom Slayer feel solid and heavy in a world that is losing its shape. He moves with a sturdy and balanced resolve, his hand checking the seal of his helmet to keep the swamp out of his spirit. Deep in the heart of the swamp camp, the final trial of the Crimson Woods takes place as the warriors huddle together on a small and elevated mound of stone. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and humid, a realization that the red mist is settling on their skin like a second layer of armor. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared breath, where they breathe in time to stay calm against the rhythmic pulsing of the ground. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the dry, sun-baked hills of Argent-Deneur and how they miss the sound of the wind through the wheat fields. The sound of a swamp wraith screaming in the distance is a high and piercing note, signaling that the true enemy is the hunger that tries to turn your own blood into water. The experience in the blood swamps ends with the warrior standing at the far edge of the red fog, looking toward the next region, the Citadel of Cinders. The red of the swamp has led to a sovereignty of the gray ash. He carries the weight of the larva's gland and the silence of the groves. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path through hell is a path of increasing heat. The focus would now shift to the burning walls, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the smoke into a world of molten iron, falling soot, and the industrial heart of the demonic army. The final legacy of the fifth part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the unbroken will. You have seen the warriors walk through the mud and the bone to find the fire within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the acid and the weight of the fog. As the crimson glow of the swamp fades behind you and the first gray spires of the citadel appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doom Slayer finds its fifth and grounded resolution in the emergence from the muck, leaving behind the living world for a world of metal, ash, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the wet, clutching heat of the swamps behind and rises toward the Citadel of Cinders, a massive fortress of black iron and jagged obsidian that serves as the industrial heart of the abyss. This is the place where the demons turn the raw materials of suffering into the armor and blades of their army, a region of molten rivers and choking smoke. The atmosphere here is dry, scorching, and oppressive, and the ground beneath the boots of the night sentinels is a floor of scorched metal plates that are so hot they shimmer with a hazy light. The air tastes of coal, burnt hair, and the sharp, bitter sting of cooling slag. The sound of the world is a constant and rhythmic thump, as massive mechanical hammers strike the anvil of the earth, making the entire citadel feel like a colossal iron heart that is beating out the rhythm of the end of the world. The Doom Slayer leads the team toward the main intake vents, his silver armor reflecting the orange glow of the forges. Realizing that in the citadel, the danger is the heat that wants to melt the spirit before it ever touches the flesh. As the team pushes through the outer foundry floors, the atmosphere shifts to one of industrial chaos. They find rivers of molten brass flowing through open channels, casting a deep, bloody light onto the ceilings of the fortress. You see the way the light glints off the unfinished armor plates of 1,000 demons, looking like a field of black glass. This is the era of the Iron Forge, where the atmosphere is one of relentless toil and burning shadows. This part of the history is a story of the dark smithy, a realization that the enemy is not just a horde, but a machine that is building itself faster than the sentinels can break it. The sound of the steam hissing from the cooling vats is a sharp and piercing shriek, a noise that breaks the heavy air like a scream. The Doom Slayer moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand feeling the vibration of the great engines beneath his feet as the orange glare of the metal tries to blind him to the movement of the guards. He feels the searing heat on the face and the steady grit of ash under his fingernails, a feeling of total and grounded determination. Deep within the chamber of the great piston, the atmosphere becomes confined and violent. The group must time their movements between the massive iron blocks that crush anything in their path to keep the forge's air flowing. This is the trial of the perfect timing, where the atmosphere becomes one of extreme pressure and muffled cries. The warriors find that the floor is covered in a layer of slippery oil and metal shavings, making every step a gamble against the weight of the machine. The sound of the piston hitting the base is a deep and final boom, making the chamber feel like the inside of a giant's chest. This part of the history is a realization that to stop the forge, they must become the jam in the gears of the dark. He feels the vibration in the teeth and the steady throb of the heat against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the center of a wide, circular platform overlooking the main furnace, the group encounters the Forge Master, a demon encased in thick, glowing iron plates that breathe fire with every movement. The fight is a story of the steel against the furnace. The atmosphere is blinding, loud, and searing as the master swings a massive, white-hot hammer that sends sparks flying across the platform like tiny stars. This is the trial of the hardened strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of high precision and lethal heat. The Doom Slayer moves with a brutal and direct efficiency, his own mace clashing against the demon's armor with a sound like stone hitting iron. The sound of the master's roar is a deep and rasping growl, making the air feel like it is filled with the breath of a volcano. When the master finally falls into the molten pits below, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and smoldering stillness, a realization that the fire of the citadel is now without a leader. Leaving the furnace, the journey leads to the edge of the cinder bridge, a narrow path of black glass that spans the gap between the foundry and the central tower. The atmosphere is vast, windy, and ash-filled, a realization that the paintress of this dark world has used the soot to paint a sky of eternal gray. This part of the history is a story of the final sabotage, where the atmosphere is one of high stakes and fatting light. You see the way the ash falls in heavy flakes, looking like gray snow that never melts. The air is dry and carries the taste of sulfur and old wood. The sound of the wind through the iron spires is a low and haunting moan, signaling that the heart of the machine is a place of deep and lonely power. The walk through the Hall of the Shattered Blades is a story of the Iron Grave. You encounter piles of broken sentinel swords that have been collected and prepared for melting. This is a moment of raw and metallic grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the citadel is the place where the history of the kingdom is being erased. This part of the history is a story of the melted record, where the survivors must walk past the ghosts of their own weapons. The sound of their boots on the metal floor is a sharp and respectful click, making the Doom Slayer feel solid and heavy in a world made of scrap. He moves with a sturdy and balanced resolve, his hand reaching out to grab a handful of the gray ash, letting it slip through his fingers like the time they have left. Deep in the heart of the Citadel camp, the final trial of the iron walls takes place as the warriors huddle together in a small and secret air duct. The atmosphere is intimate, hot, and gritty, a realization that the smoke is getting into everything they own. This is a story of the sovereignty of the clean memory, where they talk about the cold mountain streams of their home to keep the heat of the forge from driving them mad. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the citadel is strong because it is rigid, but they are strong because they can bend. The sound of the hammers in the distance is a dull and constant thud, signaling that the true enemy is the machine that never gets tired. The experience in the Citadel of Cinders ends with the warrior standing at the very top of the central tower, looking out over the red plains of hell toward the final destination, the Dark Lord's Palace. The gray of the ash has led to a sovereignty of the deep purple. He carries the weight of the Forge Master's hammer and the silence of the cinders. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the end is a path of final confrontation. The focus would now shift to the Black Gates, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the king into a world of shadow, royalty, and the face of the one who started the war. The final legacy of the sixth part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the unyielding spark. You have seen the warriors walk through the fire and the iron to find the steel within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the smoke. As the orange glow of the forges fades behind you and the first dark shadows of the palace appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doom Slayer finds its sixth and grounded resolution in the destruction of the forge, leaving behind the industrial world for a world of shadows, endings, and a journey that is reaching its final hour. The journey leaves the cooling ruins of the citadel behind and enters the Black Palace, the final seat of the dark royalty that has orchestrated the end of the world. This is the center of the abyss, a region of infinite shadow and heavy silence, where the architecture is made of a material that is darker than the void and as cold as the space between the stars. This part of the history is a story of the final door, a realization that the path of the Doom Slayer has always been leading to this single point in time. The The atmosphere here is cold, still, and absolute, and the ground beneath the boots of the remaining sentinels is a floor of polished obsidian that reflects nothing but the red of their own capes. The air tastes of ancient dust, dry ink, and the sharp, electric scent of a storm that is frozen in place. The sound of the world is a deep and final hum, the vibration of a universe that is waiting for the last word to be spoken. The Doom Slayer leads the final handful of warriors toward the great throne room, his hand resting on the hilt of a blade that has seen more blood than any man should ever know. Realizing that in the heart of the palace, the danger is the peace that comes when you have nothing left to lose. As the team pushes through the grand audience chambers, the atmosphere shifts to one of regal dread. They find that the walls are lined with the banners of every world the Dark Lord has ever conquered, their colors faded to a uniform gray. You see the way the light from the flickering torches turns the shadows into long, grasping fingers that reach for the silver of the sentinel armor. This is the era of the final king, where the atmosphere is one of inevitable endings and quiet authority. This part of the history is a story of the throne of bones, a realization that the enemy is not a monster, but a mirror of their own desire for order. The sound of their own footsteps is a sharp and echoing snap against the obsidian floor, a noise that carries the weight of every person who has died since the first breach. The Doom Slayer moves with a sturdy and final might, his eyes fixed on the massive doors ahead as the cold breath of the abyss tries to slow the beating of his heart. He feels the steady pressure in the chest and the raw cold of the air against his skin, a feeling of total and grounded somberness. Deep within the Hall of the Silent Kings, the atmosphere becomes dense and ancient. The group must walk past the statues of the previous Dark Lords, their eyes made of red gems that seem to track the movement of the living. This is the trial of the ancestral weight, where the atmosphere becomes one of psychic pressure and muffled sound. The warriors find that the air grows thicker with every step, a realization that the palace is trying to crush their will before they reach the throne. The sound of the wind through the high, narrow windows is a low and haunting moan, making the hall feel like the inside of a massive lung. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the shadows, they must hold onto the light of the home they left behind. He feels the steady ache in the temples and the constant vibration of the floor beneath his feet, a feeling of total and grounded defiance. At the center of the great circular plaza before the throne, the group encounters the palace guard, a creature made of shadow and red lightning that stands 10 feet tall and wields a spear of pure obsidian. The fight is a story of the steel against the void. The atmosphere is violent, dark, and sharp, as the guard moves with a blurring speed that leaves trails of red energy in the air. This is the trial of the final reflex, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast impacts and mental clarity. The Doom Slayer moves with a brutal and direct power, his mace shattering the guard's spear with a sound like glass hitting stone. The sound of the struggle is a harsh and grating clatter, making the air feel like it is filled with the shards of a broken mirror. When the guard finally dissolves into a puddle of black ink, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and final stillness, a realization that the path to the Dark Lord is now open. Leaving the plaza, the journey leads to the foot of the throne itself, a massive seat carved from the heart of a fallen star. The atmosphere is vast, silent, and weightless, a realization that the Dark Lord has been waiting for them. This part of the history is a story of the last conversation, where the atmosphere is one of raw humanity and divine burden. You see the way the Dark Lord sits, his armor a dark reflection of the Slayer's own, his eyes filled with a profound and distant exhaustion. The air is cold and carries the taste of salt and finality. The sound of the Dark Lord's voice is a deep and dust-like whisper, signaling that the heart of the war is a place of deep and lonely sorrow. The walk to the center of the room is a story of the final choice. The Doom Slayer looks at his remaining brothers, their armor broken and their faces covered in the ash of a dozen battles. This is a moment of raw and existential grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the war ends here, one way or another. This part of the history is a story of the shattered seal, where the Slayer must decide whether to strike the final blow or to let the cycle of the Dark Ages continue. The sound of his boots on the obsidian is a sharp and final thud, making him feel solid and heavy in a world that is ready to become a memory. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand gripping the hilt of the crucible as it ignites with a blue fire that illuminates the entire palace. Deep in the heart of the throne room, the final trial of the Dark Ages takes place as the Doom Slayer strikes the ground with his blade, sending a shockwave of blue energy through the black floor. The atmosphere is intimate, sacred, and final, a realization that the gates of hell are being sealed from the inside. This is a story of the sovereignty of the final sacrifice, where the Slayer chooses to stay in the dark so that the light of Argent Dinur can return. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the world being put back together. The sound of the black walls cracking is a deep and final note, signaling that the true enemy was the fear that the dark would never end. The experience of the Dark Ages ends with the Doom Slayer standing alone in the center of the collapsing palace, the blue light of the wraiths surrounding him like a shroud. The black of the palace has led to a sovereignty of the eternal vigil. He carries the weight of the fallen kingdom and the silence of the Savior. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened peace, a realization that his journey is no longer about a map, but about a promise. The focus has now shifted from the war of the world to the peace of the grave, as the history finds its final and grounded resolution in the closing of the gate. The final legacy of the seventh part of the Dark Ages is a story of the strength in the lonely heart. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire, the metal, and the shadow to find the purpose within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the crown. As the red glow of the abyss fades into the permanent dark, the gates of hell lock with a sound like thunder, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Doomslayer is finished for now, leaving behind the world of men for a world of silence, shadow, and a journey that will continue in the dark for all the years to come.